Ready to go? Right. Okay, dear friends, my name is Bobo Lowe. I have the great honor and pleasure to moderate the session on the next conflict on the horizon, tensions in the Indo-Pacific. I'd like to start by introducing our distinguished panelists. To my immediate left is Keiichi Ichikawa, Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary and Deputy National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Japan. To his left is Professor Jae-Sung Lee from Korea University, Director of the Ilmin International Relations Institute. To Jae-Sung's left is Markéta Pekarová Adamová, Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies at the Parliament of the Czech Republic. And finally, we have Jacob Stokes, Senior Fellow at the Indo-Pacific Security Program Center for New American Security. Ladies and gentlemen, the security environment in the Indo-Pacific is, shall we say, fraught. There are escalating tensions between China and the Philippines. Sino-Japanese relations are more challenging than in decades. Pyongyang's rhetoric has become increasingly warlike as its nuclear weapons capabilities expand. And China and Russia are conducting more military exercises and patrols in Northeast Asia. And all this is taking place against a backdrop of growing speculation about a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, multi-dimensional strategic rivalry between China and the United States, and a Sino-Russian partnership, as we've seen in the last couple of days, that appears stronger than ever. But there are occasional positive signs. The sharp downward spiral in US-China relations appears to have been arrested, at least for the time being. Beijing has toned down its wolf warrior rhetoric, and the threat of an early assault on Taiwan appears to have receded. So to start the discussion, I want to put a few broad questions to our panelists, but also to you in the audience. I want this to be very interactive. So the first question really is the most basic one. It's how do you assess the likelihood of major conflict in the Indo-Pacific? And if there is to be conflict, where do you think it'll take place? How do you interpret the recent apparent softening of Chinese foreign policy? Do you think this is just a temporary tactical retreat because China's economy is in a bit of trouble and no one likes it other than Russia? Or do you think that this signals a strategic shift in Chinese foreign policy? Speaking of China and the United States, how do you see that relationship evolving? And what do you think the implications would be if Donald Trump gets elected in November? Now, this is a question particularly for Keiichi here, but also for all of you, is we hear a lot about a rules-based order, but what does it mean in the specific context of the Indo-Pacific? A Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, advocates a free and open Indo-Pacific based on rule-making through dialogue. So could this be the key to long-term stability in the region, basically by reconciling different value systems and interests? This is particularly a question for Jae-Sung. How does one manage a problem like North Korea? Is China part of the problem, or is it actually key to its solution? Maybe it's time to recognize that North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons. So what could be done to persuade Pyongyang that there is an alternative non-nuclear path? Now, this is a question that was raised by excuse me, Sabine Fischer in the last panel. How important is the outcome of the war in Ukraine to Indo-Pacific security this time? Would a Putin victory embolden Beijing? Or conversely, if the Ukraine war continues indefinitely, will this have a restraining effect on China, but also North Korea? And this is a question really for Markéta. What role, if any, should European nations and NATO play in security building in the Indo-Pacific? Or should they really just concentrate on what they're good at, which is European security, and in particular the threat of Russia? And speaking of Russia, do you expect Russia to be a disruptive influence in the Indo-Pacific as well as Africa, Europe, and other parts of the world? And finally, what confidence-building measures might be taken to reduce the risk of conflict in the Indo-Pacific? So lots of questions, and I'm really looking forward to some answers. So, Keiichi, let's start with you.
It's a challenge to answer every kind of question that you have touched upon. And my name is Keiichi Ichikawa, by the way. I'm a Deputy National Security Advisor and the Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary of Government of Japan. I'm so thrilled and happy to be here to join the very prestigious the international conference like this in a beautiful city of Tallinn. Thank you very much. And the question about the prospect of Indo-Pacific, I think one of the important aspects we need to have in mind is the diversity. The region of Indo-Pacific is so diverse. Different countries with different history, different the level of economy, different religion, different society, and different ethnicity. So in that sense, we need to have it in mind. Very different from European theater. That is the first thing. And secondly, again, diversity. Especially, we need to emphasize that aspect, especially after the outbreak of Ukraine war. Unfortunately or fortunately, we are now in the process of transition in a historical context. So I think our international community, it is getting more challenging compared to in the past for the international community to be united based on a set of certain fundamental values. Of course, the fundamental values, of course, need to be respected and observed. Democracy, human rights, the freedom, etc., well, needs to be pursued and respected. But at the same time, in reality, as I said, international community has become more diverse and sometimes divided and confrontational. So in essence, instead of emphasizing the values, it might be a good way to emphasize the principles, importance of principles, especially well demonstrated by the UN Charter, for example. Peaceful resolution of the international dispute, no use of force, respect for territorial integrity, etc., etc. By emphasizing, by sharing those the basic principles, which can be widely shared, we might be able to make this confrontational international society less confrontational, so that we might be able to explore the peace and stability in that region. So, so in that sense, I would like to emphasize the vision the Japanese government has been promoting since the former Prime Minister Abe back in 2015. That's the free and open Indo-Pacific vision. So this vision is that, bearing in mind the diversity in this region, we are trying to make the region into a place where the basic principles, like I said, freedom, openness, inclusiveness, rule of law, freedom of navigation, etc., can be ensured. And also, under the banner of a free and open Indo-Pacific, together with like-minded countries, we, Japan, having utmost effort to strengthen the connectivity, various kinds of connectivity. In the field, not only trade and investment, but also energy, food, health, cyber, and of course, maritime and area security. So that we would like to pursue the region, Indo-Pacific region, based on the rule of law and other basic principles. And in addition, it is also important for us to emphasize repeatedly clear opposition to unilateral attempt to change the status quo. As we have observed recently, there are various kinds of attempts in that region. But as an international community, raise a voice to oppose unilateral attempt to change the status quo. That's really important. So let me stop here.
Okay.
For starter.
Keiichi, I have a follow-up question. Now, US President Joe Biden has talked a lot about the democracy versus autocracy divide, and this is a narrative that's extremely popular in Washington. But it's clear that many countries in the Indo-Pacific are uncomfortable with this kind of division, and these countries actually include US allies. Now, Tokyo has been very polite, but I wonder whether there's a fundamental contradiction between Biden's democracy versus autocracy divide on the one hand, and Fumio Kishida's vision of rulemaking through dialogue and what you're talking about, diversity, inclusive,ness, all that sort of thing. So,
thank you very much, Adiawal, for your question to deepen understanding of our policy, as well as our alliance with the United States. To be very frank, there is no contradiction for our perspective, because we share the fundamental objective, that is to realize the fundamental values to be widely shared. As I said before, democracy, human rights, really important, ultimately. But at the same time, there is a reality that is very diverse, especially in the region like Indo-Pacific. So while sharing the objective, it's like climb the mountain. Everybody try to reach the summit, but the way to reach that summit, it varies.
yeah.
So in that sense, while sharing the objective, we can think about respective approach which you consider available and effective, being reflected the reality of the region. That is a strategy and the way of thinking of Japanese government.
Okay, thank you. Jason, Keiichi spoke about emphasizing principles. Do you think there's a world, an Indo-Pacific world, where North Korea will ever recognize such principles?
Well, that is typical example of what and why we have to work with the rules and principle. I will get back to that point soon. Hi, my name is Jason Lee. I'm John Monet Chair and Director of Inman International Relations Institute in Korea. And, well, I would bring the issue of two Koreas and the Indo-Pacific geopolitics. And let me first start by saying that here in Europe, we have Ukrainian war. And in East Asia, Northeast Asia, we have Taiwan issues. We have the Korean Peninsula, the North Korean issues. In the middle, we have the Gaza, Israel, Hamas. So there are simultaneous multiple front in the world, and Indo-Pacific is one of those fronts. So we, in a sense, we have to see the picture from a different angle, but those pictures are interrelated. And the second point I want to point out as a context is that what we are seeing is not geographical fight, which means a certain country versus another country. But what we are witnessing is a war against the value and principle you just mentioned. And also, to a substantial degree, the current tension and current conflicts are testing the solidarity of the West. So in Northeast Asia, on the Korean Peninsula, what we are seeing is the collision, the rise and collision of two trilateral schemes. One trilateral scheme is the United States, Japan, and South Korea. The second trilateral scheme is China, Russia, and North Korea. So in East Asia, we have two trilateral the competition, and that is becoming a new normal. It looks like new, but back in the Cold War period, actually that was an old song.
Exactly.
So we are still singing an old song, but in a different context. In 2024, China became much stronger than before. In US-China competition is going on. North Korea actually became a de facto nuclear country. South Korea in 1950 was one of the least developed country. Nowadays, the South Korea is knocking the G7 doors and being a front runner in semiconductor, battery, and other high-tech industries. So new context. But however, geopolitical competition, the nature still need a lot of caution. And one progress South Korea have made, I believe, is restoring the relation with Japan.
Yeah.
Korea-Japan relations is like a season. It's a spring, summer, fall, and winter. We don't have many long summer period, but usually the seasons are changing. But unusually during past decade, we had a very cold, icy season. But actually, it is coming back, and the Camp David summit last year made the trilateral, the coalition pretty strong. In another trilateral side, the notable phenomena is that Russia is getting closer to North Korea. North Korea allegedly provide ammunition to Russia, and that is currently being used in Ukraine. And in return, Russia will provide the missile and other military technology to North Korea, and Russia is backing up North Korea diplomatically. Few weeks ago, at the UN Security Council actually this time did not renew the expert panel on North Korean sanction. It has been running for more than a decade, has been renewed every time. This time, Russia vetoed it. And the United States and Korea have accumulated a numbers of evidence that North Korea and Russia were doing arms transaction.
Okay.
But this time, if the expert panel, it's like a CCTV. So when they make a report, there will be an evidence, and Russia didn't want it, and North Korea didn't want it. So what they decide to do, took it off, the CCTV. Expert panels are gone, dismissed at the end of April, a few weeks ago. On the next day, on the first day of May, Korea, Japan, United States, actually the UN ambassador delivered it, a total of 50 countries, I guess most of your countries are in that group. 50 countries made a statement that we need another separate monitoring institution on North Korean sanction. And at least we have to follow what is going on. And that is exactly what this Lennart Meri conference has argued. Let's not despair. Do not despair, but act. Don't lament on the dismissal of the expert panel on the sanction, but we can do another thing, and we can act another thing. So I solemnly request you and your country to pay attention to what is going on in the war of the value and principle. And if you are standing on the value and principle, stand with us in following out on the peace building on the Korean Peninsula. Maybe
Jason,
yeah.
I just wanted
Sure.
to come into, because you mentioned trilateralism here, Russia, China, North Korea. How do you see that trilateral arrangement working? Because it strikes me that if you're sitting in Beijing, North Korea is your nightmare client state. In other words, they use their weakness, in a sense, to blackmail you. Say, if you don't support us, we'll collapse, and then the Americans or Japanese will come in, you know. So I wonder whether you think Beijing is comfortable with this Russia-North Korea relationship that you've been describing.
Well, that is a matter of like the comfortable friendship. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, North Korea is a smaller country vis-a-vis China and Russia, and well, they are tying with the strategic interest. Of course, they have long friendship and brotherhood, deep friendship between Russia and North Korea, but it is a strategic interest that are tying these three countries together. So, well, their nexus may not be explained solely by ideology, but at this moment, they have a common enemy, United States and the West.
All right. Markéta, I wanted to try and bring it back to Europe, this kind of connection between what's going on in European security, what's going on in Indo-Pacific security. Now, people have made this sort of comparison between the war in Ukraine and possibly impending conflict over Taiwan or in the South China Sea. I was wondering actually how you saw this relationship. Do you think even there's a relationship, and should NATO get involved?
Thank you very much. I would like to say that this is Russian war in Ukraine. Yes. This is important to say. It's not Ukrainian war. And I don't want to correct anybody, but I think this is the perspective we should have in mind. So Russia decided to invade Ukraine. And we have to follow very carefully, because China is as well following. As was mentioned, these ties are obvious. And that's why how we react on the war, how we are showing our solidarity, but an action, not only solidarity, we have to act. That will affect as well Chinese approach to other parts of the world in Indo-Pacific. And all these things are connected. Yesterday on the first panel, when Prime Minister Kallas said all these dots or these spotlights are connected. You know very well what's going on, who is working with whom. You can see Iranian drones on the battlefield in Ukraine. You can see how North Korea is supporting Ukraine. You see these ties very clearly. So that's obvious that how we react, that will affect as well China. For us, it's very important. Maybe it's for somebody ridiculous. Why am I in this panel when I'm from the Central European country? But we know very well that it's important to take care of what's going on in Indo-Pacific. That's why we are so supportive as the country, Czech Republic, to Taiwan. And we see that it's not only about economical ties, it's not only about economy and trade, it's much more about the values. They were mentioned. We are doing our diplomacy value-based. We are not only talking about values, we are acting according to them. And this is how we should deliver to our citizens, because democracy has to deliver. And what we should deliver first is security. This is our role as politicians. So I see these ties very clearly. Talking about Indo-Pacific, we have in our government implemented a strategy about Indo-Pacific. We are, much more aware of what's going on in the region, and as well at the same time we try to cooperate on the European level on it, because it's very important to have allies in this field. For us with Taiwan, it's not only about semiconductors, as it's sometimes described by media or maybe other politicians who are not in favor of this relation. But it's much more about, caring about democracy and freedom, because we should have strong partners. If not because of the reason that we feel it as important, the main reason can be as well that our, let's say, I don't want to call them enemies, but rivals, they are connected and they are cooperating, as we mentioned. So that's why we should as well. And we are much stronger if we are connected.
You say that everything is interconnected, but sometimes there's the skeptic in me, which hears terms like rules-based international order, international law, everything is interconnected. What does it actually mean? When you say that what happens in Ukraine with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that is connected to security in the Indo-Pacific, my instinctive reaction is, well, how? I get that it's interconnected. Personally, I do think it's interconnected, but I'm not quite clear what you mean by that. And so I'm going to push you a little bit on that one.
Okay. I think we have underestimated Russia for a long period, After 2014, annexation of Crimea, this should be our wake-up call.
Right.
Now we see the reaction of Russia. They took us weak because we showed them that we are not prepared to be more strict on them, to show our strength, to be really not only condemning by the resolutions, but as well acting after this act. And this is how this kind of dictators, Putin is dictator, not president for me, it's dictator, and this kind of autocrats are thinking about us. They are showing us their plans. They are quite clear about. China is quite clear about their goal, which they have. And we should have this lesson from our own experience we have, not only in the past, in the history, which is for decades, which is crucial as well, of course. And here in Estonia, in Czechia, we know what we are talking about when we are talking about occupation, for example. But as well, our own lesson learned in our quite recent past, which is only years lasting. And at this period, I think that we should be much more, effective in the cooperation before the full-scale invasion on Ukraine. And coming back to your question is because China is as well quite clear in their statements, and they have this aim to be the superpower and to have the different, multilateral landscape in the world, and to replace U.S. just this clear. Let's name it. This is their aim. And what does it mean for us? What are the values they are using in their own country? What's the respect to human rights in their country? Minorities, such as Uyghurs. What about Tibet and other, issues we know very well. So this is what we can't respect, I am sure, because we should protect our own way of living, and this because we can live in this circumstance because of democracy, freedom, which we have and we cherish, and at the same time is because we have rules-based order, and rule of law is among those principles.
Okay.
Respect to human rights is among those principles. And I don't want to convince anybody that this is the best way, but for us it is. We enjoy it. So I just think that we protect our own way of living.
Okay.
The connection is on many fields, but when China see us losing in Ukraine because we will lose these principles and rule of law and international law principles, then why don't repeat the same scenario with Taiwan?
All right. Jacob, the role of the United States. It's one of the great constants in the Indo-Pacific, but people are wondering whether it's going to be the great variable if Donald Trump gets in. What will that mean for not just US-China relations, but for the future of alliances in the Indo-Pacific? And really Trump's way of saying, well, I deal with strong men, great powers, and the rest can mind themselves.
All right. Well, thank you, Bobo, and thanks to Helga and the conference organizers for inviting me. It's a really key question, and just it is an honor to be up here on the stage with this very distinguished groups. Thinking about the topic of this panel and the potential for a next conflict, we've seen U.S. officials say that conflict in the Indo-Pacific is neither imminent nor inevitable, and I think that's a really important statement and one I agree with. But unfortunately, conflict is a very real possibility. So I spend a lot of my time looking at the situation across the Taiwan Strait. So I'll focus my remarks at the outset here. I think the debate on Taiwan in particular tends to focus too much on timelines, like 2027 or 2035, and not enough on assessing the combination of factors that'll shape Xi Jinping's decision-making. And I think we can divide those combination of factors into two broad categories. So one is the set of factors that favor large-scale Chinese aggression towards Taiwan. This includes the military balance across the Taiwan Strait, which is tilting somewhat in China's favor. Xi Jinping's ambitions for national rejuvenation, which of course include gaining control over Taiwan. The success of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, in Taiwan's domestic politics, at least at the presidential level. And also larger societal shifts where more people in Taiwan identify as Taiwanese in addition to or in place of Chinese. So those are the factors, I think, driving forward China's ambitions towards Taiwan. But I think there's another set of restraining factors that we have to understand. One is the continued military operational gaps that the People's Liberation Army, China's military, has, particularly as it relates to amphibious lift capability. So the boats, basically, they would need to go across the strait and conduct an invasion. In addition, as we study how China talks about its own military, we see Xi Jinping showing a lack of confidence in the intangible skills of the PLA. He worries basically that despite all this shiny new equipment, that once they get into the field, they might fall apart for lack of effective combat leadership. And then in addition, there's the overall effect on the economy that a Taiwan invasion would have that I still think plays a major restraining role for Xi Jinping. Earlier this year, Bloomberg News did an analysis that found that it would be $10 trillion, trillion with a T, to fight a war basically in the beating heart of global trade and global tech supply chains. And then finally, there are U.S. efforts to bolster deterrence while providing narrow reassurances to Beijing that Washington doesn't and won't support Taiwan independence. So I think given this constellation of factors, we have to be sure, or we have to try to ensure that on any given day, Xi Jinping gets up in the morning, looks at this equation, and decides that's not the day to order a large-scale operation against Taiwan. And ultimately, deterrence rests on Xi Jinping believing that invasion of Taiwan would put at risk his own hold on power in mainland China, not just that he would fail to take Taiwan.
Yeah.
So in my view, that's really Xi Jinping's bottom line. And if we get that calculus right and shape Xi Jinping's thinking, if we deter China today, this week, this month, this year, then we'll get a reward. And the reward for that is that we'll get a chance to do it again next year, in 2027, and maybe next decade, and so on. So I think, how do we go about doing that? Overall, we can think about kind of 3 pillars. The first is reinforcing conventional military deterrence by fielding credible combat capabilities today while staying on the cutting edge for tomorrow. And this applies to the US, its allies and partners, and that includes Taiwan as well. The second is really thinking about how to revitalize US alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and link them together increasingly as a lattice work or a web of security relationships. You know, you won't have an Asian NATO, but we are moving away from a traditional model that was considered more hub and spoke. And this includes the more multilateral groupings like AUKUS, the Quad, and the US, Japan, South Korea trilateral that was mentioned earlier. And then the third pillar is pursuing principled diplomacy with China to stabilize the situation. And so here we see President Biden's summit with Xi Jinping last fall and the follow-on diplomacy around it. And of course, this isn't just a US initiative. China's belligerence has caused regional states to take steps to enhance their own defense in order to uphold regional peace and security. And I'd note in particular the major changes in Japan's defense policy. So finally, as we think about strategic messaging on Taiwan towards states in the Indo-Pacific, we have to think, I believe we have to speak in the language of interests and principles rather than values, the way we might speak about it here in Europe and in amongst liberal democratic allies. There's no doubt that democracy versus authoritarianism is an animating feature of China's desire to gain control over Taiwan. And as we said here in Estonia, of course, the moral case for democracy is indisputable. But in the Indo-Pacific, states, and I would argue this includes democracies, care more about the interests in regional peace and stability than about regime type per se. Yeah. And so we as a transatlantic community need to make sure we're speaking in a way that matters to them. And the point here isn't to appease China, but rather to be pragmatic in building a coalition in support of upholding cross-strait peace and security. And also, we want to put the onus on Beijing to escalate and avoid giving China excuses for aggression, however flimsy they might be. So just as some thoughts around Taiwan at the outset, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Jacob, I wanted to come back to you. We don't have a panelist from China, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say that, look, the language of Washington is about punishment, containment, China a malign actor. You give us no respect. What positive perspective are you offering to Beijing to have not even a particularly great relationship, but a more or less functional or stable relationship? So what, in other words, what inducements, not even inducements, but what assurances, reassurance, can the United States offer China to make China behave less badly?
It's a good question. So I mean, I think that the rules and norms of international behavior are set, and it's not really up to on the United States to offer a certain particular set of inducements to China. It's about China meeting the rules and norms that have been agreed to basically by the international community. But that said, I think in the context of US-China relations, some basic assurances are there. You know, US officials have said that it's not America's goal to change the Chinese Communist Party regime in Beijing. You know, and that doesn't mean we let their human rights abuses slip or any of the other things that we don't like. But the fundamental goal is not to shape Chinese politics internally. It's about to shape the international system in which China's behavior, in which China is behaving. And then I think the other piece, particularly related to Taiwan, is this question of you know, the U.S. not supporting Taiwan independence and making that clear. ultimately that's not a near-term risk, but that is something that Beijing is worried about and is an opportunity to reassure them.
There is a perception in Beijing that the US is starting to resile from its one China policy. But okay, that's fair. I'm going to open it up to questions and interventions. Can you introduce yourselves, and can you keep the questions and interventions to 1 point?
Miroslava Gungadze. I have one question, but with two parts. First,
One question.
okay, fine. Fine.
Let's be fair.
China kind of have a position in Ukraine war now. They offered a peace plan that President Putin, who visited China recently, said he sees that China understands this conflict. Question is, how do you see the China role in China peace plan in this, and what China wants from this? How supposed to play out? And do you think that China has to use the military power to squeeze Taiwan? Do they have other means to do that? Thank you.
Hannah Notter, just in the middle there.
Hannah Notter, James Martin Center. Jacob, thanks for that great articulation of the drivers and constraints from the perspective of the Chinese when it comes to Taiwan. My question actually builds on the previous question. You haven't mentioned the war in Ukraine and the extent to which the outcome of that war or a perception of Western resolve might also shape Xi's thinking. So I was wondering whether you can talk a little bit more to the connection between those two conflicts and the way that the Ukraine war shakes out, how that might impact on dynamics in that region. Thank you.
Just in front. You've got them. Well, Tom, you go ahead.
I'm going to take a completely different approach, but I'll ask each of you to answer. Right now, I mean, assuming that China is the threat, it's largely because of technology with 1.3 billion people. Liberal democratic technology environments, we have them in Europe, we have them in the United States, and we have them in the Indo-Pacific, I mean, from Taiwan, Japan, down to Oceania. And what we do is we compete, these three compete with each other. Our legislation is to screw one of the other liberal democracies. The total population of these three groups is about 1.3 million. Russia doesn't enter this calculus at all. I mean, they just get their stuff from China. China is the threat in tech, and that is where the future threats will be. Is it possible to develop a security, defense, cybersecurity, but also trade regime between Europe, the US, and your area, which would enable us to stand up to the challenges of China? This is not a new idea, but I mean, I would like to hear whether this is at all feasible. I personally do not see the liberal democratic world competing against China at this rate without 1.3 billion, the talent pool of 1.3 billion in the West, or sorry, the liberal democratic world, to stand up to the threats of and challenge of China. And I'll say that I mean, Anna Bradford has a very good book on basically the legal technological scene in the United States versus Europe versus China. There is nothing there about the area, your area, but in a sense, it needs to be done. And I think, and I'll just say personally, I don't see any other way out than the three groups getting much closer in technology, which is where the threats will always be.
Tom, can you pass the mic behind you?
Thank you very much. Hiro Akita from Tokyo. My question is about the impact of Russian nuclear blackmail on the security landscape in Indo-Pacific. Russia has not exploded a nuclear bomb, but it has been effectively using it to prevent US or NATO from intervening to Ukraine. So what is this impact to Korea or Japan or other countries' choice. For example, in South Korea, according to polls, more than maybe 70% of people think that South Korea should have a nuclear. So the impact is already happening. So what is that impact, and what U.S. could do to mitigate the negative impact by Russian nuclear blackmail?
Hira, can you pass the mic to Charles there?
Charles Grant, Centre for European Reform. Just one very brief observation from a recent visit to Beijing. Although Xi Jinping is unstinting in his support for Vladimir Putin, there's no question about that, to my surprise, the academic community is not.
Yeah.
Almost every academic I met was horrified by China's commitment to Russia. They say, well, it's a club of losers with North Korea and Iran. We're a globalist country. We should be leading the global south, not leading an axis of autocracies. We don't want to be with the losers. So my point is that although the government is unstinting in its support for Russia, the intelligentsia is not at all. And they write articles in newspapers, in Chinese language newspapers, saying this. A guy called Feng Yujian has done this, and he's a respected academic, and I think it's very interesting.
Just picking up very quickly on that point, in studying the China-Russia relationship for 30 years, one constant theme is this contempt that many Chinese commentators and analysts, academics have for Russia.
Disdain.
To this day. But I mean, it's been constant. Whereas the relationship may have improved, but the contempt level remains the same. Yeah. Anyway, let's start with you, Jake.
Sure. So on the question about China, the tools China would use to try to bring Taiwan under its control, its preference, Beijing's preference would be to not use the military option, right? Initially, they tried to essentially entice Taiwan close to deepen ties with mainland China through trade, through cultural outreach. Those tools have largely failed. So now they're really focused more on a coercive set of tools. And so the military is one of them, but also information, warfare, cyber is a big piece of it. So I think ultimately China would prefer to not use the military option to get what they want, but increasingly those other tools are falling short. And so the question for China is, do you resort to the only tool you have left, basically, especially given your military is much stronger than it used to be. So that tool is much more attractive.
Do you think they're confident about their military performance? I've not, after all, been in war since '79. Yeah, it's one thing to have the kit. It's quite another to be able to use it effectively.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's the crux of it, that they're very confident in the equipment and the technical sophistication of their military, but the X factor, is the personnel, is the implementation. They have this concept known as the 5 incapables, and it includes things like, make good combat decision, understand what your commander told you to do, those kinds of very basic blocking and tackling, as we would say, of military affairs, they don't have confidence in. That's their own assessment of their abilities. Right. So I think that's a real restraining factor.
Yeah. Markéta, do you
I
want
would like to just add something, because I think we are quite aware here in Europe about Russian propaganda and disinformation and these hybrid threats. But we are not enough when it comes on China. And when I was in Taiwan last year, we were discussing this, and this is a phenomena which is used as well by China to Taiwanese people, and we should be much more aware here in Europe as well. Because what's doing Russia in this very cheap method for them is that they are, spreading untrust between us, between each other, and I mean in the whole society, not only between, the countries, nations, but as well between us in the countries. And this is as well happening, and this is connected with technologies as well. We should be much more aware about, and we should tackle much more confidently with. And I'm not seeing it in all countries the same. Maybe some are not such aware about, because they believe in their educational system, in the criticism which is between the society. But I think we can observe it's very effective right now in many countries. And I will show it on an example which Europeans will definitely know very well. It's among us, among European Union nations. It's Slovakia right now, Hungary, and this is spreading to the region very quickly and very effectively, I would say.
Okay.
So this is something which we should be as well much more aware of.
Do you have a view on it's not really a peace plan, but the Chinese 12-point paper on the war in Ukraine? Or do you think just basically Beijing it's so pro-Moscow that it's simply not credible as a mediator?
Yeah, that's not the peace plan. I would not call it like this.
It's Putin's talking points.
Yeah, because the only peace plan is Mr. Zelensky's peace plan, I would say.
Okay.
And the first point is quite clear. Russia have to withdraw all the troops from the Ukrainian territory. So this is the only peace plan we can follow. And I think this is just to make maybe more chaos in this all, diplomatic negotiations, if there are some.
Jae-sung, South Korean nuclear weapon?
Okay. Well, to say it shortly, United States doesn't want any kind of nuclear proliferation, even among the allied countries in East Asia and in the Pacific. That is pretty clear. Instead, then, as long as there are a nuclear threat, then the right answer so far has been well-functioning extended deterrence. Still, Korea, for example, Korea is just working on it. And last year, Korea and the United States agreed to establish nuclear consultative groups, NCG. Well, sounds like nuclear planning group, but we are not going for nuclear sharing. So the basic proposal of NCG is upgrading extended deterrence scheme. So, and we have very imminent threat from North Korea. If this extended deterrence scheme will work properly, then it will be fine. We don't have to risk of inventing another nuclear weapon. But credibility and assurance. Credibility is the real basis of alliance. So far, it is functioning. But what if one of scenario that then Korean people will really lose or be doubtful about the efficacy of extended deterrence, then there is a strong public opinion saying that Korea may need to be the nuclear power. But that is public opinion based. So far, the major mainstream policy line is quite strictly focusing on extended deterrence. So that is the kind of the mood and the reality side of the nuclear issue you have mentioned.
That's also a question for Japan, because Japan has doubled its defense budget. So the classic soft power is becoming a harder and harder power, much more comprehensive all-round power these days. So again, the question applies to you. Do you see Japan possibly going in that direction? I mean, not in defiance of Washington, obviously, but that it's something that might be conceivable in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Listening to the comments of my colleagues as well as the questions from the floor, I would like to stress that the most important point to avoid any contingency or hot conflict from taking place in this region is to maintain a strategic balance in this region. Not only military sense, but also economic, technology, the economic security recently, as well as in relation with advanced technologies, all the related. Because the challenge China is posing is quite comprehensive.
Yeah.
To giving a very deep impact on the entire globe So in that sense, we must not bog down in the discussion, concentrating only on military affairs.
Yes.
Rather, we need to think about comprehensively. And also, we need to think about audience outside Europe, United States, or some countries like Japan and South Korea. There are many, many countries somewhere in the middle, Africa, South Asia, and Middle East. So in that sense, there are various the policy issues we need to pursue. And first of all, as I said, how to strike a strategic balance. Of course, military pillar is very important. So within the military deterrence, of course, nuclear deterrence is the number one important point.
Yeah.
And so bilateral extended deterrence dialogue between Japan and the United States, as well as between Korea and the United States, are very important. They're becoming more important because, especially after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, Russia does not hesitate to mention the coercive message about the possible use of the nukes. So in that sense, the new chapter unfortunately opened. So in that sense, how to maintain the strategic balance in terms of the extended deterrence. And you mentioned that we Japanese increased budget on the defense. That includes acquiring strike capability, as well as other type of new weapons. And I think it's really important to think about how to strengthen the U.S.-provided extended deterrence, coupled with, together, supported by non-conventional weapons they're provided by Japan. So that we can create, we can increase the level of deterrence, so that we would like to help maintain a strategic balance in this region. So that is.
Can I just ask you a follow-up on that? You mentioned that it's important that we don't just think about balance in military terms, economic balance, for example. Do you think a useful confidence-building measure in terms of Indo-Pacific security would be, say, Chinese membership of the comprehensive and progressive agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP? Is there utility in that?
You are reading my mind because I was going to say something about CPTPP. Because in economic pillar, CPTPP may be one of the very important foundation for us to explore the economic prosperity. So in addition to the original member of CPTPP, just a couple of years ago, UK joining us. And there are some other the Asian countries, including South Korea, they are interested in, they're coming. So I think that the economic partnership or free trade agreement, they provide a very important foundation for economic partnership, which ensure the free trade with shared set of standards. That's really important. So when it comes to China, again, it's really important whether or not China can fulfill the international standard, which are widely shared.
Okay. All right. Jason, you wanted to come in on this point.
Great point. I with two fingers crossed. I hope that the Ichikawa-san's prospect will take place in the region. But if we take a little bit less optimistic the view, then China used to run its one regional trade scheme as RCEP. And what CPTPP and any kind of new trade regime need the proper representation and consensus among the United States, Europe, and key Indo-Pacific players. When we look at the conventional and ordinary goods and services, it may work in that way. But what matters will be high-tech, rare earth material, and some what we call the critical industry and critical areas. And still, the buzzword will be economic security. Many countries want to secure those parts. So in reality, what we have to deal with the CHIP Act from the United States, CBAM from the European Union side, and as long as these countries are prioritizing those goals, then making a comprehensive scheme of new trade regime is not in reality that easy. So we need to be very strategic in choosing the right scope and right sector.
I'm conscious that we haven't answered Thomas Ylvis's intervention on tech. Is China's sheer mass going to eventually mean that it overtakes the West? Because some people would argue that it really doesn't. You can have as many people as you like, but if you're not creating the conditions for innovation, you're going to fall behind. It doesn't matter how many billions of people you have. But I don't know, does anyone want to sort of take
I could take a stab at that. I mean, I think what we've seen in terms of China's ability to innovate is that often they've been a good fast follower and have come up with putting technologies together in unique ways that are in ways that work for local conditions in China. And so I think the U.S. and our allies and partners can still be, very competitive with China, but we have to take their ability to innovate seriously. Okay. And I think if you buy Xi Jinping's argument that we're on the cusp of another industrial revolution that changes the nature of the economy, they're trying to seize that. And so I think we need to compete, and it's not clear who will win from the outset.
Okay. Let's take a next round of questions and interventions. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Latvian former foreign and defense minister, now director of think tank Northern European Policy Center. I will pick up now on the latest discussion about trade and security. When I was in European Parliament, I was a rapporteur for CETA, in those days the most comprehensive trade agreement with Canada. It takes years. We know that. It's a good goal. We have to do it. Now, before that, I know that, for instance, Koreans lately are very much involved also with trying to advance industrial, including military-industrial cooperation, for instance, with my country, which is very good. But how much, and this question to my Japanese friends and Korean friends, how much actually you are ready to get involved with each other as far as security and defense cooperation, because we all know how also sometimes history shapes our past. But in this case, I think it's highly important looking from our region to see how much you are willing practically to collaborate on these issues if we speak about security in Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Just pass it to the gentleman in front of you there.
Thank you very much. It's Mark Champion from Bloomberg. I just wanted to ask Mr. Ichikawa and Mr. Lee, just in the Beltway, in the US, there's a bit of a debate in particular between people who say China first. We need to focus on China. Russia's a distraction. We need to finish this in Russia and move on. And then there are others who say, don't be daft. What happens in Russia is going to determine, the next stages with China and the China first policy. And I just wondered, as people who actually live there, what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Lady to my right.
It works? Yeah. My hand was, I am happy you saw me. Japan chair at ICDS and professor of Asia-Pacific politics at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. I would like to bring the discussion a little bit back, if I may, to the minilateral or trilateral groupings, which has been raised a few times, and I think it's one of the very interesting developments in the Indo-Pacific region in terms of countries think about cooperation, respond to threats, and in terms of possible inter-regional with Europe cooperation. And it's quite interesting if we look at, of course, the US-centric alliances in short order. All of them have been strengthened in recent years. Thailand remains with a question mark, but Japan, Korea, Philippines, quasi-alliance with Taiwan. And parallel to that, we have a number of minilaterals, which have actually different levels of institutionalization. Look at US, Japan, Australia, already since the early 2000s. But then we have the Quad, US, India, Japan, AUKUS, and of course US, Japan, South Korea. And the latest edition, because these are growing in numbers, we have with the Philippines. The latest leaders meeting, the latest also last year's foreign ministerial level meeting, the Quad with the Philippines, Australia, and Japan. My question is, how do these alignments, what we call in IR theory, international relations jargon, I would say, so which actually vary in terms of institutionalization, but overlap in many ways in a number of issues. How do they relate to the traditional alliance? And do you see a possibility of some of those, perhaps in the future, as supplanting the traditional bilateral alliance in terms of these minilateral or trilateral configurations?
Okay.
And one more element, whether for the EU there's an opportunity
one question,
to engage.
sorry.
Okay.
Peter. Sorry, we have to go, otherwise it's
Peter
impossible.
Semneby from the Swedish Foreign Ministry, currently Swedish Special Envoy for the Korean Peninsula. I had an observation similar to Charles Grant's from Beijing, but since he has made the point, I'm not going to ask the question how disturbed China may be by the Russian-North Korean deal agreement as a complicating factor for security on their doorstep. I'm going to ask a question about another policy development in North Korea, and that is the scrapping of the national unification as an objective. What, in your view, is the background, and what are the implications of this? On the one hand, it involves the acknowledgement of the Republic of Korea as a legitimate political entity, not recognition of it in a formal sense, but acknowledgement as a legitimate entity. But an entity that is the subject of vitriol that in some ways even goes beyond what we have heard before. Is this, as some observers have claimed, a prelude to a confrontation? Or is it, as others argue, the first step towards creating a situation that similar to what existed between East and West Germany in the 1970s and 1980s, with what that may imply for the future?
All right. I'm going to take a third round of questions, so don't panic if you haven't been picked yet. Keiichi, do you want to start this time? Pick any question you want.
Any question.
You don't have to answer all the questions.
With regard to priority, need to be placed on China or Russia, and as Prime Minister Kishida repeatedly mentioned that today's Europe may be tomorrow's East Asia. So in essence, it's inseparable with regard to security between Europe and East Asia. So it's interrelated. So of course, situation on both sides are different. Of course, timelines are different. But when it comes to the interrelation in terms of security, I think we need to have in mind both subjects at the same time. And of course, the situation, war in Ukraine, the aggression by Russia, is ongoing war. So in essence, it's imminent for the international community to address. We need to determine to continuously support Ukraine as much as possible, while needed to keep imposing the sanctions, strict sanctions on Russia. It's crystal clear. On the other hand, as I said before, rise of China has been posing as very comprehensive challenges. Comprehensive challenges. So in that sense, we need to think about how to cope with to the Chinese agenda. And in addition, we have to have in mind, as I said before, audiences in the developing countries, Asia, Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. So, we need to have good understanding and support from those countries, so-called countries in the middle, countries in the middle, or countries in the global south, what you call. We need to be conscious about their opinions, about their perspectives. That's really important because they are also having a lot of difficult questions. And they recently, as you know, they tend to criticize us for double standard. So we need to be very mindful. In order to attain the stability, peace and stability in the international region, we need to think about how to address the problems they are facing as well.
Okay. Right.
Okay, maybe the quick answer to the unification rhetoric of North Korea. Yes, this is disappointing, and it can be read as a deep disappointment. But when you are reading North Korean rhetoric, well, sometimes we actually need a double reading, triple reading. What are the real meaning and real purpose of making that rhetoric? And sometimes paradoxical interpretation might be also helpful. So some analysts are reading it as North Korean signal, kind of urgent signal for dialogue and meeting, well, optimistically, or at least somewhere in the middle. North Korea is trying to, showing their uncomfortableness toward the U.S., Japan, China trilateral. And China is also strongly showing very uncomfortable stance, and their goal is breaking this tripartite alliance, and still think that South Korea might be the easiest one to work with because South Korean politics is polarized. So when they feed the more the atmosphere for the warm atmosphere for the progressive and give pressure to the incumbent government, that will be workable. Related to that, the future of Korea-Japan relation and the future of trilateral U.S., Japan, Korea depends to a substantial degree on domestic politics. In the most recent election, South Korea, the incumbent government had a very bitter defeat. Actually, foreign policy was not the main agenda. Well, there are a lot of some other real political agenda. But the government is not in a majority situation at this moment. Kishida administration is not super popular. The popularity is still not that very high. Joe Biden is facing a big challenge from Donald Trump, but so far Joe Biden regard the trilateral partnership as one of the biggest diplomatic achievements. Yeah. So in all those three countries, domestic politics will matter, so I'm still cautiously optimistic and very hopeful for the enhanced the future for those trilaterals.
Very good. Markéta.
I would like to answer to the lady, if I may, if I remember the question well. I think what's very important that as well we Europeans should have these bilateral relations between us and Indo-Pacific countries. And this is the shift we can see in our country as well. Czechia is now building up new relations between Japan, Korea, in this case, of course, it's important to see trade between us, for example, with South Korea. It's one among the largest investor in my country, so we are building on these ties. And as well, for example, this year I will visit Singapore, I will visit Philippines. We have a lot of ties between each other, and we have to build on it. And the same with Africa, because I think we Europeans should care much more what's going on in Africa, because Russia and China is much more active there. And our evaluation of it is that we are too slow when we do something with our partners in Africa. Yeah. We are too slow in comparison with China and other countries. Of course, because when we take in account our sizes, size of the countries, if of course we take in consideration EU, then it's 27 countries which have to find their own position together, the common position, which is not easy, of course. But this is what I feel is very crucial nowadays, because then we are losing it in a UN, and we can see all the results.
Well, if I may, I'd like to actually answer a question you asked earlier that I dodged, which was...
I never noticed.
Which was, how would Donald Trump change America's China policy if he was elected? I think there is a narrative out there that Joe Biden basically took Donald Trump's China policy completely. I think that's ultimately wrong and quite misleading. So, the Biden administration has talked about their China policy as having 3 pillars and kind of a silent fourth one. Invest, which means focus on domestic renewal, align, improve alliances and partnerships, build up minilaterals and so on, and compete with China. And then a quiet fourth one would be communicate with Beijing, right? And so I think what you would have with Donald Trump is, probably more domestic turmoil rather than renewal. So that's the invest part. The align part, if you have more issues with your allies bilaterally, you're probably not in as good a position to build a coalition to counter China. So that's the align part. The compete part would be carried out a little bit differently. That part probably has more similarities, and I don't think there would be as much working communication with Beijing. There might be a basic level of signaling, but it will be often done through Twitter rather than in the diplomatic tables in which the Biden administration is doing it. So I actually think there'd be pretty significant differences in Donald Trump China policy.
No, that's interesting. Okay, final round of questions. Sam, you've been very patient at the back. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Samuel Ramani from RUSI, the Security and Defense think tank over in London. And I just had a question to you about, briefly about Russia and China and their approaches towards the global order. Like, I agree with you 100% that the Chinese show a lot of contempt towards the Russian strategies and for power projection in the Middle East and Africa, just in the same way they might be voicing it about their policies towards Ukraine. We've seen some coordination on the Gaza war and some other issues, but do you really think that there's any possibility that China and Russia will actually start coordinating more substantively on crises that are breaking out across the world, or is it just going to be just shallow UN voting because the Chinese just don't like the Russian approach?
Can you pass the mic down to Carolina here, please? Just here, in several rows in front, sorry.
Thank you very much for a fascinating panel. This is not really my topic, so because I'm a Russia idiot. When I'd like to take up the question about technology. When we get that question, we usually focus on the cutting edge. But I think what China is very successful in doing is providing affordable solutions. And with no human rights strings attached to them. That is certainly the case in Central Asia, for example. And when you invest in infrastructure, information infrastructure. This is a long-term investment, and it's also path deciding. And it also has to do with the international standards that China wants to promote. It has to do with the whole economic ecosystem that underpins social media and so on. And I think we're going to see more and more of a divided information society globally. So what's your thinking on this? What can we offer? How can we compete?
Okay, that's great. John, did you wanted? Yes, just over here, please.
Hi, my name is Lars Peter Fredén. I'm an ex-Swedish ambassador, having spent most of my life on China. My question is to Markéta, Pekarová, Adamová. I followed your very brave policy towards Taiwan for a couple of years, and it seems to me that you have called the Chinese bluff, the mainland Chinese bluff on this. What have been the reactions from Beijing, and what have been the reactions from other EU member states?
Just the mic's coming. The gentleman just here. Maybe if you stand up, he'll see you better. No, don't do that.
So, I mean, if I make it short, I'd just say France. But to explain a little bit, my question is, in the Indo-Pacific, the only European EU country that really has territorial security and so forth interest in the region is France. It's more towards India than China. What's the role in regards to anything we've been talking about today as far as a partner with the US and Japan and so forth, or is this kind of a strange relationship?
Just before you give us your concluding remarks, it struck me in the course of nearly an hour and a half. We've talked a lot about the Indo-Pacific, but where's India in all this? I mean, it looks like Asia-Pacific to me, which used to be the old sort of description, and Indo-Pacific became sexy. But I see no sign of India, so maybe someone can explain that. But my last question, really, for all of you, is we come back to the original title here, the next conflict on the horizon. So I want to ask you all, what is the conflict or potential conflict you are most worried about? Both in terms of its gravity, but also its imminence. So I'm going to start with you, Jake.
All right, well, that's an easy one. No, I think, I tend to think that despite what we have from China related to Taiwan, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, that in many ways a Korean Peninsular conflict is potentially most imminent, and also has a lot of gravity because it wouldn't stay on the peninsula. No. And neither would a Taiwan conflict. I think increasingly, for those of us watching the region closely, we're thinking about, is there going to be opportunistic aggression? So if there's a Taiwan contingency, does North Korea take that as an opportunity? And if there's a peninsular contingency, does China take that as an opportunity? And if we go back, to the Korean War and look at history, those areas have always been linked in the minds of the leaders of those places. And so in many ways, you could see it as one kind of strategic area. And so I don't mean to take a cheap shot out by not choosing, but I think that they are more linked, and too often we think of them as silos, that there's the peninsula and, and then everything with the maritime disputes in Taiwan, but they're actually quite interlinked. And so the imminence of one could cause the imminence of another one and exacerbate the gravity too.
Markéta.
The question you raised at the beginning of this panel was as well if China changed tactic when it comes to threaten us European or US politicians, and this is the answer. Yeah, they changed tactic. Our president of Senate was 3 years ago in Taiwan, visited Taiwan with the delegation. It was during COVID, and it was, he was threatened by China quite openly and clearly. Me, a year ago, it was different. The Chinese tactic changed. Of course, diplomatically, they complained a lot, and they were saying that all the people are sad about it, and so this is how they describe it all the time. But it was not so open. It was not so transparent to the public. So they changed it, but it's just a tactic, I guess, I presume. It's not that they changed their position on it. What changed as well was the environment in our country. To be honest, in Czechia, former president was really pro-Chinese, and that was as well the point where they felt themselves very confident. When I was attending, this was time when we changed as well our position towards China in the government, and our new president, as well changed the position. So he congratulated to Madam Tsai those days when she gained some reward, and as well. Now we congratulate it to the president, new elected president as well. So it's our sovereign politics or policy towards Taiwan and towards China as well.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. What conflict are you most worried about?
Well,
no, I want to ask Markéta first.
Sure. Okay.
Yes. I'll come to you in a second.
Of course, not easy, but as was said, there are no only black scenarios. There are many options.
Sure.
And like you mentioned India, because I feel now it was forgotten for a discussion that this is very crucial role of India in the region. What is better? It's always better to be prepared for worst and have this hope for optimistic way. So I would be much more optimistic, but at the same time prepared for the worst scenario.
Very sensible. Yeah, Jason.
Okay, a very quick point. Okay, Russia, China, coalition. Well, I would say very issue specific with strategic interests, not in a comprehensive scheme. Second, affordable Chinese technology like EV. Well, certainly it will be workable in many parts of the world. But two things. One is China is still dominating the supply chain of rare earth material. They are still controlling 70% of cobalt, lithium, and other rare earth material. Second thing, electric vehicle and the future mobilities are no longer hardware item. This is all software item. Semiconductors and chips will be essential part of next generation vehicle. In that sense, are we sure that we are safe in terms of the big data from those automobile? So that is one thing. Well, that is one thing we are seriously thinking. Last point, what will be the worst case scenario with the perfect storm scenario? Russia is threatening with tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. So tension is escalating. And at the same time, in the Middle East, the Iran will take more provocative steps. Yemen is joining, and Hamas is making full range of re-attack. Okay, so, and plus, China is pressing Taiwan hard and almost reaching to the level of blockage. At that situation, North Korea may provoke, or even limited scale attack on the South Korean remoted island, and which will be probable, feasible. Then North Korea can test how many multiple front the United States can handle, and what degree of counterattack they can expect from the South Korean side.
Very interesting. Keiichi, you have the last word.
Okay, thank you very much. I think about India is the most important key in terms of maintaining a strategic balance, I repeat. Of course, their population already exceeds that of China. And they have tremendous young people who are good at technologies. And India are very ambitious to engage with other regional countries, like to ASEAN, to Central Asia, to Africa, to the Middle East. So in our sense, how it is critically important to engage for us to engage with India to make constructive and effective the partnership bilaterally as well as multilaterally. So one of the good examples is the Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. And we have been working for a while to provide necessary engagement assistance to the countries in the region, in the Pacific. I think that is one of the good endeavor. And also India is really eager to have economic security partnership with relevant countries like US, EU, Japan, and others. And as we have discussed, our technology, tech industry is one of the key driver to shape the international environment from now on. So in our sense, in larger picture, India is the most important key for us to achieve peace and stability in this region. And with regard to that possible conflict, I think I can't say. As Jacob said, there are various factors we need to take into account, and so eminence as well as gravity would vary depending on the factors that comes to the surface. But at the same time, I would say that there are several, unilateral attempts to change the status quo here and there, East China Sea, South China Sea, or Himalaya, etc., etc. Of course, in Middle East. So in that sense, I think that would be the reality for us to live together with such, tension from now on. So the most important mission for us is to manage the peace and stability with a certain level of tension, avoiding those situations fall into a big crisis. That is a very important mission for us. That's my last word.
Excellent way to finish. Dear friends, I'm not even going to begin to try and summarize such a rich discussion, but what I would say is that I started today's panel by putting a ridiculous number of questions. And I'd like to thank our panelists on not just my behalf, but on your behalf for, frankly, a heroic effort in providing such interesting and insightful answers. Can we congratulate Keiichi Ichikawa, Jae-Sung Lee, Markéta Adamová, and Jacob Stokes for their wonderful contributions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all from the conference organizer side as well. Just 3 quick announcements. There's lunch downstairs, so go for it. At 2:30, we'll do in the room Seville, which is when you go out on the right around the corner. There'll be a live podcast recording for Tell Inside Out, which will feature, it's Ben Tallis and Aaron Burnett who are doing it. It will feature Timothy Schneider, the Foreign Minister of Estonia, Margus Tsahkna, Elliot Cohen, and the newly minted Secretary of State of the